So whenever we take in oils, for example, that are rancid, seed oils, cottonseed oil, partially hydrogenated soybean oil, this can set off an inflammatory response, just like a food allergy can. And by the way, lots of people out there, even people listening right now, are suffering from inflammatory responses to food due to allergies. I do want to say that because I certainly was. But when we get to these oils, when we shift away from these rancid oils and stuff you find in stores, corn oils and that kind of stuff, and we move to raw, organic, cold-pressed olive oil, raw, organic, cold-pressed hemp seed oil, especially hemp seed oil, we can start getting some of this prostaglandin 2 anti-inflammatory gamma-linolenic acid anti-inflammatory response happening. And this little thing called GLA that's in hemp seed, it's also present in spirulina, has a very powerful anti-inflammatory effect. And we are so fortunate as Americans that we can actually get access to hemp seed because you couldn't back in the 70s, you couldn't in the 80s, right? It was only in the 90s that it really came into the U.S. and they started allowing it, and obviously it's going to increase. The hemp seed alone, I've got a friend of mine in Calgary, Alberta, who is healing people with hemp seed and hemp seed oil, just those two. He's having amazing results just switching people off of very toxic, oily kind of meat products and things that are just been cooked to death and really have nothing to do with anything natural. Just shifting them over, just like, hey, how about having more hemp protein, hemp seed, and hemp oil in your diet? And he's having wonderful effects with all kinds of conditions, and especially he's having anti-inflammatory effects.
I had heard, and this may not be correct or accurate or even current, but that because of the THC, the active psychoactive ingredient there, that the U.S. requires hemp seeds to be irradiated to sort of deactivate the psychoactive element. Do you have any idea what the current policy on that is?
Well, I hope that's not happening. I mean, it's illegal for them to irradiate organic foods that are being shipped across the border, and I rely on my friends over there at Manitoba Harvest, for example, and Nutiva, who are hemp seed importers into the United States and exporters out of Canada into the United States, in order to bring the product in without it being irradiated. And I trust them and believe them that it's not being irradiated. Right. I can't say that of all products. By the way, if you look into food irradiation, one of the things that I just want to put this out there because I've researched this extensively, that they're using a radioactive block that usually contains radioactive cesium, and this block sits in water during the night when it's not being used, and then it's raised up out of the water underneath the conveyor belt where all this food stuff is being pushed across. That water is radioactive. That water is not controlled. It is put right into the sewage system of any city, town, port, or wherever those radiation equipment, wherever that radiation equipment is located. And that, to me, is an absolute crime against humanity. And that's just part of this overall unconsciousness that we have about food and food irradiation and bacteria and all that stuff. We have got to now get with the program at every level, and everybody is listening, whether you work in government or wherever you work. Please help us to bring consciousness to food and food processing so we can get out of this really abysmal state of just polluting the environment haphazardly and unconsciously.
Absolutely. Yeah, and another concern too, hemp seed is a really a very effective source of omega-3 fats. And the challenge with all the omega-3s is that they have a large number of double bonds that are really susceptible to oxidation and damage. And when they're exposed to oxygen in the air, they can become rancid, essentially, and then their benefit is diminished considerably. And so it becomes very important to make sure you have a high-quality source. And that's why almost all the conventional commercial sources of the traditional oils, either the corn or the soy or whatever is being used, is typically damaged because of this. And there's even a concern too with the even the higher quality oils that exposure to sunlight, so that having it in a glass bottle but an amber bottle so the sun doesn't get through, and the temperature, of course. But you have to be really careful of the oxidation products. And one of the things that we're looking at now is actually working with manufacturers to put a very powerful antioxidant called astaxanthin, which is actually what's found in krill, but it's also found in algae, and it just virtually seems to eliminate this lipid oxidation so effectively. It's almost like putting an oxygen seal around it. So I just would exercise that caution to make sure that the manufacturer that if you're going to choose to use these oils that is really careful about making sure that it's not an oxidized oil.
I completely agree with you. I mean, we always want to store our oils. By the way, they should always be in amber glass or even Myron glass, dark glass, away from any heat source or even an electromagnetic field source, and in a place where they can't not be hit by the sun. So I like to store all my oils in the refrigerator, away from far away from any kind of EMF field. Now my refrigerator isn't actually. This is funny. People come over to my house and they're like, "Where is your refrigerator?" They walk around. This is hilarious. Like for a couple of days, they'll be walking around like, "Am I missing something? What is going on here?" And then they realize that my refrigerator is actually my back cupboard, which I have a house up in the temperate regions of central Ontario, Canada, and my back cupboard actually is cold enough to actually refrigerate food. It's 56 degrees in there, Fahrenheit. Wow. So that works out. So I'm fortunate that I don't have, the magnetic field and all the stuff that most refrigerators have. And I store everything way back in there in the dark so it doesn't get exposed. I want to mention, this is really important about this antioxidant revolution that's occurring. There is an amazing antioxidant super herb out there called mangosteen. And I'm speaking specifically of the organic mangosteen powder that is now available via online retailers and is coming into stores like Erewhon in Los Angeles, California, and Hollywood, that is very powerful antioxidant and anti-inflammatory, one of the greatest ever discovered. And mangosteen rind, it's a fruit rind, like an orange rind, but obviously not an orange. This rind has been used traditionally in medicinal systems in Southeast Asia all the way into Indonesia since the beginning of recorded history. I mean, since people first, started living in those areas. And it's the kind of the fail safe, like at the very end of somebody's life when everything else has failed and, they're really suffering, boom, they get them on the mangosteen rind. Now, it's a bit bitter, but it does work. And I do want to put a very strong mention of it out there because if you are really suffering, answers are out there for you. The mangosteen rind is very specific. Its antioxidants are very specific in affecting rheumatoid arthritis, something to be aware of.
And in the late 80s, I studied physician Dr. Thomas Brown's protocol, which was based on the supposition that a mycoplasma infection was causing it. But I've treated over 3,000 patients with rheumatoid arthritis. I mean, that was a big part of what I did when I was practicing. And I have a lot of experience with it, and it's for those who have it, it's really a really challenge of a disease because it can be so crippling and can actually be terminal in some cases. But the pain is just tremendous. They throw some of the most toxic drugs that medicine has are thrown at rheumatoid arthritis, and really the challenge for most patients treated traditionally is to get them off those toxic drugs, which is killing them. But it's just they're in such severe pain that they have to do something. But what I've noticed in treating rheumatoids is that there's really two central elements. It's almost invariable because it's an autoimmune disease that they have to be on vitamin D. I mean, most people in the country are low in vitamin D, but real autoimmune patients are particularly low. And then of course there's the emotional component. There seems to be some type of autoimmune trigger. There's some emotional element that's seems to be present before the age of 5 or 6, and usually almost always there and seems to benefit from some treatment with some good solid emotional work that typically involves energy psychology. But that's not, it works synergistically with the approaches you're mentioning. But sometimes if you don't do the basics, they're independent of the herbs and the vitamins that you get down to simple sun exposure and treating emotions, they can add that on top of it and you have a miracle.